name's Alan Pertuit, and I'm the Vice President of Shell's Downstream Projects Organization. I actually live in New Orleans, and I work everywhere else around the world. A lot of time in Europe, a lot of time in Asia, and as well as the Middle East. But I've been in the industry for about 35 years. As a field engineer, instrumentation and control systems, when I kind of cut my teeth. When I used to do real work. I was an engineering leader in Shell, and I was also an asset manager in both the upstream and downstream parts of the business. And so now, with the title called VP of Downstream Projects, I can tell you, the theme of the conference is actually contextually what I based this presentation on, and that downstream for us is a conventional chemical plants, but it's also quite a bit of new biofuels, renewable energy systems, if you will, CCS, hydrogen, both green, blue. So there's lots of renewable natural gas. So there's lots of new things that we're going after, the new feedstocks, et cetera. So the industry, as far as we're concerned, is transforming. It's transforming quickly. I saw that there are 100 folks from overseas, and frankly, I think when you walk down the streets in Europe, folks aren't as big of fans for companies like Shell as they are in the Gulf Coast of the United States, right? They tend to want us to move a lot faster than we can conceivably move at times. But in any case, look, I have 3 sons, and 2 of them are engineers. And one of them asked me, hey, what's it take to be a good engineer? And I said, well, 3 things. 1, keep it safe and be nice to people you work with. Manage changes carefully, and make things that cost less than you can sell them for. And boy, do we have changes in our hands. I refer to a book, I recommend a book. It's called To Engineer is Human. And the book goes into how the worst catastrophes in recorded history have to do with the failure to manage change. And so it's really complex for a young engineer to think that way, but in fact, if we don't manage change carefully, we are going to be having devastating results, as history has shown us. So let's have a look. This is Shell's businesses. Now, if you think about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, you'll see that we're trying to position ourselves to decarbonize the energy and products system. I see folks taking pictures, but I think they're going to have, this is going to be published in the proceedings, as I understand, but it's fine to take pictures as well. But in the Scope 1, 2, and 3, we're basically decarbonizing what we call sectors. And if you look at this slide, these sectors are mobility, residential, marine, aviation, agriculture and forestry, commercial, road transport, industrial, and commercial. I can give you an example, and this is kind of a complicated slide that you can have a look at your leisure, but the big data centers, which you don't think Shell has customers in big data centers, but in fact, decarbonized energy, and whether that be solar systems or wind energy, et cetera, is a big part of what we do, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of what we do as we move towards the net zero emissions, which aspirationally is in 2050. So there's a lot of changes, and our oil and gas companies are rapidly turning into sustainable energy and chemical products companies. I mentioned renewable natural gas. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Anybody work in a renewable natural gas plant? I was in a plant not too long ago in Kansas that had 30,000 cows on it. Now, I grew up in the city. I've never seen that many cows in my life. But the cows, obviously, you feed them and they create feedstock. And feedstock goes in these huge things called digesters. They're about the size of a Roman Colosseum. And then you take basically the gas and you give the inerts back to the farmers to use as bedding materials and things like that. So that's kind of new to us all, right? So how do you take an oil and gas paradigm and you apply it to something like that, right? It's a challenge. You have to learn a lot from the farmers. I've met two people that run dairies over the last 6 months. Both of them were PhD biologists. And both of them told me that the only companies that basically market cheese, if they can't provide sustainability guarantees, then those cheese manufacturers will not buy product from them. And that's here in the United States, right? So what are we doing? We're trying to give them the sustainability that they need, right? Whether that be solar panels on top of their, they call them vent barns, or whether that be, renewable natural gas systems. So it's becoming a huge value driver for folks. Hydrogenated vegetable oil, waste vegetable oil, animal fats. We have technologies that basically convert that to sustainable diesel and aviation fuel. I mentioned green hydrogen, but we also have CCS, right? When you can capture your CO2 and inject it, of course, that would be the last resort, but it is a way to decarbonize the future energy systems. And of course, I mentioned biofuels of all sorts. So moving towards mid-century, the oil and gas will have plenty of company in the energy equation. And honestly, things have been changing for at least as long as I've been in the business. But there's an intense transition right now. And it's bigger than probably anybody in the room, unless I've got centurions joining us here, bigger than any transition that I've ever experienced in my life. I think about my grandfather. My grandfather was alive during the Kitty Hawk flight. And he also saw the first man to land on the moon. And nobody had laptops back then, right? So imagine with the tools, and I mean, you guys are brilliant. I heard a few presentations, and I mean, from an automation perspective, we're a lot different place than we were in 1969. Imagine with those tools what we can do to drive what the world needs us to drive, and that's sustainable energy and chemical products. So I'm going to advance the slide here. I'll tell you a story. So this slide is a little bit about a journey, right? So I remember Convent Refinery, which is in southern Louisiana. It was actually a Texaco plant, and that's where I started. Actually, I started at the Port Arthur Refinery, and then I went to the Convent Refinery. And I get a call from operations. I had been there about 2 weeks, and they told me that they have a problem with their combustion turbine. And this particular combustion turbine had a starter turbine. Not sure how many of you folks out there work in rotating machinery, but a starter turbine, basically when the shaft is at 0 RPMs, the clutch engages the starter turbine, starts the machine. It's typically a steam turbine, or an electric motor, but starts the turbine, and once the gas turbine sustains its own momentum, the clutch disengages. Well, in order for you to restart that turbine, if it trips, that shaft has to be at 0 RPMs, all the way from 4,800 RPMs as an example. Well, that for the size and mass of a shaft that big, that could take hours. Well, I don't know about many of you that worked in refineries, but operations aren't very patient. So that process, when I went out there, I got a call, we need some help. There were some operators with a 4x4 piece of wood that had it propped up against that shaft, and it was screaming and smoking, and fire was coming out of it. And I'm thinking, wow, this is cool, huh? For a young engineer, I'm thinking, wow, I'm in the right business because I'm having a lot of fun with this. But in fact, their plea for help was, how can we get better at this? This can't be safe. And it wasn't. And so called GE and, maybe looked at a disc brake system or what have you. But the point is, we all started out in a different place than we are now, right? And if you look at the safety performance of our industry, I don't have a chart here, but we do have a really nice chart that shows, In the world of commercial construction where you've got a TRCF of about 3.0 on a good year, in our industry, if we've got a 0.5 TRCF, we are very disappointed. And think about all the lives that have been saved. Think about all the injuries that have been prevented by the fact that we took safety very seriously. And I'm actually very proud of that because we're all part of making the decisions to keep people safe. And it's not always cheap and it's not always easy, but it's something that we just have to do, and it's table stakes. Huh? So waste, unreliability. I put a little picture here of a smoking motor. I'm not sure how many of you folks have faced things like that, but you know, it's difficult to think that this day and age you still have unreliable equipment, but any mechanical system will fail. It's not if, it's when. And how do we predict that, right? How do we predict failure? So I'm going to go to the next slide. So if any of you guys have been in, and ladies have been in production leadership, when you've got an unreliable asset, how can you predict production? When your boss says, what's your production going to be for the next quarter, or maybe the next 2 quarters, and you say it's going to be X, and it's actually X minus 100 because you had a motor burn up or whatever. I call that crystal ball maintenance, right, or asset management. It's anybody's guess. And then you go to reactive maintenance, and then you go to predictive maintenance. You know, I remember, the 2 a.m. calls when you get a call from an operator, and they're trying to start the unit back up, and you say, well, what took you out? And they said, did you look at the first out printer? We used to have printers. You look at the first out printer. Oh, no, where's that? And they're restarting a unit. And you're thinking, maybe you had a real dangerous situation that took you out that you need to learn from, right? That used to be what we did. But in fact, now it's not only reactive maintenance, reliability-centered maintenance, but now it's predictive maintenance. So when you can model a production system, even when you lose a key parameter, like flow or pressure, but your model tells you what it would really be in the event of normal circumstances, then you can actually reliably run your asset even when you have a bit of failures in your instrumentation systems. And I can tell you, and I worked for Triconics for about 6 years, for you folks at Snyder out there. And I can tell you right now, the most dangerous part of a unit's operation is shutdown and startup. So keeping it running is a good thing if you can keep it running safely. And a failed instrument should not take you out if you can avoid it and if you can predict what the unit should be doing in safe state. So lots of industries are taking advantage of value-adding technologies, automation technology, and we've come leaps and bounds. I think oil and gas has seemed to move a bit slower than other industries that I've actually visited, like aeronautics, or even the food industry, or the pharmaceuticals industry. But we're starting to, I think, get the message and try and push things a bit faster now. So I've seen amazing transformations in safety, asset performance, upstream and downstream. I've seen collaborative work environments, allowing virtually seamless interactions between folks far away from each other. The first time I've ever saw that was actually in upstream, where we had 345 platforms. I worked in Brunei Shell Petroleum, 345 platforms. And we had video cameras in the offshore installation manager's office all the time. I would have been kind of feeling weird if I would have cameras on me all the time, but we did. And it felt like we were connected, right? And that was a good thing. We didn't really dive too much into that in the downstream because everybody was sort of close to each other. Right? You just walk out the admin building and get on a bike or go and get in your cart and go into the plant. But in offshore, of course, you got to take a helicopter, and it's not so easy. Huh? So collaborative work environments have been tapped into in the upstream part of our business quicker than the downstream. But there's something that happened in 2020, right, called COVID. And when I was running a refinery processing 250,000 barrels of crude and I had to send everybody in my tech support group home, that made me uneasy, right? But our operations learned through iPads, intrinsically safe iPads, I might add, through all the different technologies that we could muster. We started really getting more comfortable with running an asset without people next door. And I was no fan of COVID. Nobody was a fan of COVID, but I'm even less fan of virtual working, right? I think people need to look at each other in the eyes to see their hearts. So I'm not a big fan of virtual working, but I realize it's necessary, right? And so we've come a long way. So why is process automation even a question in terms of standardization of, open process automation? Why is it even a question of whether you would do that these days? The new energies business is amazing, but we need to sharpen our approach, and we need to adapt into new industries and paradigms. And the new industries, I can tell you, are not a very patient bunch. From mega projects to multiple smaller projects. So, you're not dealing with multi-billion-dollar projects in the new energy space. You're dealing with $100 million projects, which may seem big, but when you run a major projects organization in an IOC, you don't get to have the luxury of having small projects much, but the new energies business is actually a lot smaller. And by necessity, in the new energies, you're not going to have kind of margins that you have in an oil and gas business because everybody's still learning their way into it. So even more the reason why we need to tap into automation, advanced data-centric designs, digitalization, things that you guys all do for a living is something that we desperately need as we transform our businesses. And we need to leverage that technology quicker. So the oil and gas industry, why are we transforming? Right? Societal expectations. There's a sense of urgency. Anybody coming from Europe feels it a lot more than folks here in the Gulf Coast. But there's a real case for change. Low carbon fuels, renewable energy is rapidly upon us. Biofeedstocks into chemical assets. Project costs are high, inflationary pressures are high, but also some of this equipment hasn't really been deployed in mass like we've seen in conventional chemicals and refineries. But automation has and will continue to play, as it always had, in reducing costs. If you go towards autonomous operations, which is the buzzword, right? How can we go to autonomous operations? Some folks are doing it, right? It takes courage, and it takes really faith in our automated systems. The new energy projects are not big megaplexes of yesterday, as I mentioned. They're smaller. Nimble, flexible, quick come to mind, which has not been something that's been used when we compare ourselves in the energy industry. Open process automation, it's interesting because, I met somebody on the board of directors of Shell, and he said the word digitalization and data centricity. Well, that may be common for automation companies to see, board of directors, but not oil and gas companies. I couldn't even believe that the guy said that, right? Because that's not something that's been typically a part of our vernacular in our industry. But we're seeing it, right? And it's being pulled. So new technologies, new industries, new geographies, new supply chains, and new acronyms. How do we use automation to serve as a key enabler to drive not only safety, reliability, production, but also competitiveness in capital projects? We believe all open automation systems are key to the future of automation, and there's a real need and urgency to align data standards to allow smooth transitions from early project phase to real-time environmental, allowing safe and secure data transfer. And people and skills will change as we move into the future open process automation world, and the availability of resources will be key. I don't know about you guys, you can probably attract the best and brightest out of universities. But when there's so much societal pressures, misinformation, real information about the oil and gas industry, sometimes we lose the ability to attract the best and brightest out of universities, right? When you start talking about the fact that you're moving into renewable energies, it helps a bit. But it's still a challenge considering the media's perspective. But in any case, it's something that we have to continue our journey on, right? So I was a part of a group that the World Economic Council basically sanctioned. And it sanctioned the IOGP to start the JIP 33 process. And the JIP 33, I thought back then, and this would have been probably in 2012, I guess. No. It was later than that. It was probably 2018. And I'm thinking this is going to take forever, right? It's going to take forever. Can you imagine Total, BP, Exxon, Shell, all these companies having to actually agree on something, right? Technical standards. But much to my pleasant surprise, it's actually moved quite a bit faster than I expected. And the early signs from the market are that it's helping, Because if you're a supplier, I can just imagine if all of your major customers have the same technical specification, it's a bit easier, You can mass produce, you can take waste out of the system, and you can really leverage your value in a bigger way when you have basically the ability to use that one single platform. Well, I see this open process automation as just a continuation of that same spirit, So industry standards are also culminating in collaboration, right? The collaboration that we're seeing in this world is a lot better than it used to be. And in fact, I'm pleased to see that as well. Now, there's plenty work to go around, plenty projects to go around. And I think it's worth really getting together and getting our heads into this thing pretty significantly. So I'm going to try and wrap up a bit. So in 2019, let me see if I'm on the right slide here. So in 2019, Shell launched what they called the Powering Progress strategy. More, cleaner energy, and sustainable products. So 2019, I was running a refinery. And all the CEO of the company and the executives showed on our website was, themselves in front of electrical charging stations, right? or wind turbines. And I found myself doing a lot of damage control to my folks that ran the 250,000 barrels of crude to make jet fuel, gasoline, and diesel. It was painful, right? I mean, you're talking about in this particular refinery I started when I was in my 20s, and then later on became the site manager. These are all my friends. They kind of grew up that way. And eventually, Shell just decided that late 2020 that we were actually shut this refinery down, right? So I had 900 people that I had to give the message that we were shutting our refinery down, right? Because Shell's strategy was not to have standalone petroleum refineries, right? And we've chosen to take that property and to take that asset and to repurpose it into a biofuels plant, right? While it was very painful, it was something that was necessary if we were going to basically keep to our strategy, which was launched in 2019 for the more cleaner energy and sustainable chemicals business. And we've done the same at several of our other facilities, right? We've basically shut down the crude refineries and basically making room for biofuels. So all this change is not easy, but it's necessary. And we got to keep it safe. We got to manage the change carefully. And we got to make things that cost less than we can sell them for. And it's going to be an interesting journey as we navigate through that, because it's difficult to make any margins in a business that's just starting. And you hit the rewind button back to the 1910 or whatever when Henry Ford was coming out with these cars, and you go, we're going to need more gasoline, right? Now we're going to need more clean energy. And so the challenge is ahead of us, and I think we can do it. And I think some folks around this table are brilliant enough to help move that thing along. So thanks for having me here, and I look forward to meeting you.